My name is Kurt Knapp. I live in Middletown. I have most of my life. I've been a business owner for about 30 years. I'm currently retired. Father of 3 beautiful children, and happy to be here today.
Good, good. And
My name is Tom Sebold. I've retired within the past year from the Middletown Police Department after 18 years. I reside in Middlefield and married, and I also have 2 children who are adults and out of the house, thank God. But having been in law enforcement and been around guns all my life, I'm extremely supportive of the Second Amendment and have very strong beliefs. The legal citizens should have guns, and we should be concentrating more on keeping guns out of the hands of the criminals than the citizens who have a constitutional right to have them.
that's always a battle that's being waged, though.
Mm-hmm.
What are your concerns right now? What's the road that we're taking that is concerning you?
Well, you know, in light of what happened in Newtown and a few other mass shootings recently, there's a lot of emotion right now about gun control, about civilian ownership of guns in general. And politicians tend to be reactionary when something like this happens. And they pass laws that aren't always good for the rights of citizens. You can go through history and see things like the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which got us involved in Vietnam, you know, as one example, where the public was all for retaliation against North Vietnam, and before we knew it, we were involved there for 10 years, and 50,000 Americans were killed. I think, you know, the tragedy, you know, being a father, being a gun owner, I was genuinely saddened. I mean, I admit it as a man, I cried when I heard the news about those children being murdered. But, you know, I have to say that at the same time, my second reaction was, just watch now, you know, the politicians are going to use this to make hay, to somehow restrict our Second Amendment rights. I mean, it's no secret that there's politicians out there who have always had the agenda of taking guns away from people on some level, either restricting what they can own, where they can own it, how much ammunition they can have, the type of weapon they can have.
Well, what's their motivation there? Do you think it's just appealing to the emotion of the people who want that?
I think that, you know, to some extent, it may be that they have a genuine belief that guns shouldn't be in the hands of citizens. I think they're wrong. I think that they're terribly mistaken. I mean, these same people who believe that tend to be the ones who surround themselves with paid armed guards. You know, they're fine. Their children are safe. They go to private schools. The president's a prime example. His children are protected by assault weapons in the hands of trained guards. And they always will be as long as they live, or as long as they want that protection. At the same time, they want to take guns away, you know, for now certain models and maybe later other models. I mean, politicians, especially, it seems liberal politicians, believe in a thing called incrementalism. Now, I think that cigarette smoking is probably the worst thing that a person can do to their body, all right? But at one time, pretty much everybody smoked. Then they had no smoking zones in restaurants. Then they had no smoking at all in restaurants. Now they're going for no public smoking in parks. And in some towns, they've actually tried to pass ordinances where nobody can smoke in public. And that's what incrementalism is. If they had passed a law or a municipal ordinance in a town that said, you can't smoke anywhere in town, people would have been up in arms, all right? But they do it a little bit at a time. And as I said, I'm not for cigarette smoking, but it's the idea that, you know, today it's so-called assault weapons, which we can talk about a little bit later. And tomorrow, if some maniac goes and kills a bunch of kids, God forbid, with a shotgun, is it going to be shotguns? Tomorrow? I mean, it never ends.
So, Tom, do you think maybe Americans in general have a tendency to emotionally react too strongly to things, and they want to find an answer?
No.
Or they want to find a reason why something
happens.
happens?
In light of what happened, you know, in Newtown, just so happens my daughter teaches in the New Britain school system, and she teaches what's a first, second grade rotation. She has them for first grade and follows them in the second grade. So, like Kurt, you know, when this incident occurred, I felt very strongly because I could identify it could be my daughter and her students and so on and so forth. But I think the problem is when Biden's discussion with people, certainly what's happened recently with the new legislation in New York State that Cuomo tried to pass through, I think they don't bring all the sides together. They don't try
Right.
to listen to everybody. I mean, as a retired police officer, under federal law, HR 218, technically I can carry a firearm anywhere in the country. That law was passed, I think, under the belief that retired law enforcement officers became kind of like some sort of nebulous auxiliary force to supplement the armed authorities. You know,
A
when you
modern, like, Minuteman.
yeah, so to speak. But the issue of, like Kurt said, you know, well, if it's a semi-automatic rifle in New York, they're not even talking about assault rifles. What in the law that they passed, it's all semi-automatic rifles.
Right.
So it's gone way beyond the concept of an assault rifle, you know, and eventually I think, as Kurt also said, you're going to see a transition into shotguns. And then you come up with, well, how do you come, I'm going to use New York as an example, how do you come up with the theory of a 7-round magazine? Personally, I don't know of any that are being produced right now. There may be 1 or 2 pistol manufacturers that have 7-round magazines, but in my cynical side, says to me that this is going to sound bad, but it's how I feel. There are certain politicians who have some friends who can produce 7-round magazines very quickly and profit off this. I hate to say that because I know that's not what people want to hear, but that's my personal feeling. I think, you know, what you have is you had 20 angels, because that's what I feel kids at that age are. There's no badness in them, and 6 adults who died at the hands of an individual who was unstable, who never should have had guns. So what we need to do, more than address the size of the magazine or the type of the rifle, I think more focus has to be placed on the mental health aspects and the background checks. I mean, any legal citizen who goes into a gun store has to go through an instant background check, even with the pistol permit. That happens, or at least in the state of Connecticut. I can't speak for all states. And I also think there's an interesting twist that I have to give Obama credit for in what's being talked about is not so much the medical community looking at the mental health aspects, but actually there's been talk of the CDC, because this is an issue that's very, very large. So the ability to keep guns out of the hands of bad people it's never going to exist. You can take all my guns away, and I don't have many, and you can take Kurt's guns away and all the other legal people who own guns, and we are still going to have gun crimes. If you look at the statistics which came out, America is about 10th in the world, exactly 10th in the world on a list of weapon-related deaths. Ironically, though, if you look at the statistics, a lot of those deaths are suicides. Having specifically been a police officer, if you look at the annual deaths of police officers, in the past year, I believe the numbers were 143 deaths line of duty, yet there were 146 suicides that officers died from. And having a gun around has, especially when you wear it all the time, which I do, and just as a brief note, I did not wear a gun for most of my life. I started wearing a gun after what happened in that Colorado theater. And the reason for that is I don't think I could live with myself if that started to happen, knowing that I have the legal right to have a gun and be there and not have one and not try to intervene and save people. That's my 18 years of police training.
Right.
I want to protect people.
It's a tool they have on you.
Yeah, it's a tool, and fortunately, you know, we have the legal right to carry it. And I just hate to see for the honest citizens who obey the laws, who want to protect themselves, have that in any way compromised, because I know right now if you wanted to go probably get pretty much any weapon you want, you could probably find a source within a couple of hours who gets you anything you want.
Right.
Illegal.
So, illegally.
Right.
Right, that's exactly
And
the
that
point.
person doesn't care.
And they
by
have
your
no,
background.
right, they don't care how
They
many
don't care
rounds.
if they have a 30-round magazine or a 7, because by definition, a criminal is a criminal.
Right.
Right, they don't follow laws anyway.
Right,
They
right.
act on impulse, they act on what they want to do. They don't care if it's written in a state statute somewhere that what they're doing is illegal.
Right.
And they're not going to care if they steal a rifle and go kill somebody with it.
No.
Well, in the very beginning, right after this, people were passing the blame along.
Mm-hmm.
Blame guns, and then the gun people they want to blame video games. As a person from the video game era, I can't agree with that at all. Just like you guys can't agree with guns. There are a lot of violent movies, and there's violent games.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go to, we skip all that because that's kind of far-fetched. And then we go to mental health, which in my research, mental health is what connects all these mass
Right.
murders.
Mm-hmm.
If we could talk about video games just for a second, though, what we're talking about here and there are a lot of video games with very graphic violence, with body parts flying around if you shoot at somebody, blood on the screen and all that.
Oh yeah.
But then again, this is a parent's responsibility to know what their children are playing. And I think that, I don't think that video games cause people to go out and kill other people, but I do think that, and the Army has done studies on this, because they do use video games to try to desensitize soldiers to the idea of killing in combat.
Yeah.
So I think it's very possible that a child, even an adult, who may do this constantly. They say that this Adam Lanza was playing video games nonstop for 24 hours, violent video games. That in his case, because he was already mentally ill, obviously, he was on antipsychotic medication. Right. His mother was trying to get him committed to a state mental hospital. Maybe it did have an effect. Maybe he did push him over the edge. But then again, that's her fault too, because she's the parent. She's the one who should control what he sees. Even though he was 20 years old, I don't think that he was what you'd call a sovereign citizen because of his mental instability.
Right.
And the fact that she gave him access to guns and took him out target shooting is just beyond imagination for what any parent in their right mind would do with a child who has mental problems.
Right.
I think they talk about, innate evil and all this, but I think that, and I'm probably going to catch a lot of flack for saying this, but if he had lived and was tried, I would bet you that he would be found not responsible because he was insane.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Yeah. Well, there's these two factors. There's millions of people with guns.
Right.
And there's millions, probably more kids that play violent video games
Mm-hmm.
than people with guns. And we end up talking about is 1% that end up
Right.
not being able
Right.
to put it together that what they're doing is wrong.
Right. Most people, probably the vast majority of people, know that a game is a game. It's not reality.
Right.
All right. But there are some people who don't, like this Lanza, who probably didn't know that the game became reality to him.
There's one small concern with me is how far along does this evaluating people mentally, does it get to infringing?
Well, there was a big movement in the 1970s, and if you consider this, in the early 1960s, the population at Connecticut Valley Hospital, which is a hospital, they called the Hospital for the Insane back then, was 6,000 people. And because of psychotropic drugs that came in, were invented, you have Valium, lithium, Thorazine, Prozac, and 100 other ones. Luckily, a lot of those people were able to be treated, the less severe ones, and function in everyday life. The population at CVH right now is about 600, even though there's actually more people in Connecticut than there was back then. So theoretically, you should have more people with mental disabilities in Connecticut.
Right.
But now those people are being treated, a lot of them successfully, a lot of them aren't. And that's where you get a lot, and I think Tom will back me up on this, being a former police officer, that's where you get the homeless people coming in. You know, there's a picture of a homeless person being a poor mother with kids who's suddenly thrown out on the street with no place to live. And that may happen in some instances, but the vast majority of homeless people are people who are mentally unstable. They may have been former residents in a mental hospital. They're given this medication and they're expected to maintain their own meds on the street, and they don't, because they're not capable of taking care of themselves to begin with. It's a vicious cycle, and these poor people end up in all kinds of trouble, major expense to the taxpayers.
Absolutely. I mean, Middletown has many, many group homes and so forth, where these people who've been sent to CVH for a short period of time, triaged, hopefully stabilized with the proper medications and the proper talk therapy, are then placed in the community. Some of them, like Kurt said, end up being homeless. But the real issue is the administration of medication. A lot of the people under supervised administration, those are the ones we're less apt to see decompensate and get in trouble.
Right.
The ones that are left on their own to take their own meds, you know, they tend to all of a sudden say, I don't think this medication is agreeing with me. Instead of doing what a normal person would do, is go to their doctor and then discuss it, they just decide to take themselves off the medication. And next thing you know, we have people doing crazy things like talking out loud and walking in front of cars on the street. We have to take them to the hospital, and it goes on and on. We have a large community of people who feed into that, which is why I've often said Middletown, because it still has CVH, the police department here, and this has been discussed in bigger circles, you develop after a while a certain skill set of dealing with these people that a lot of departments don't have, because we deal with them every day. And so therefore, the ability to control these people, or to control their medications, it's crucial. And there's not enough supervision, not enough money is being placed into the mental health programs. But I would like to digress just for a minute away from that, and I want to talk about the responsibilities of being an officer. I just think I want people to understand, when you have the ability to carry a weapon, especially when you carry it as a police officer. When I was young, I was an auxiliary trooper in my early 20s out in Troop K. I didn't become a Middletown police officer until I was 43. And having been brought up Catholic and Christian and everything, and referring to the Ten Commandments, I've always known that placed in this situation, I'm going to react first. I'm going to protect myself, protect my fellow officers, get in the way of the bullet from the innocent citizen, and protect whoever I have to protect. And if in doing that job I have to kill somebody, I will. But I want people to know that it's not kind of like a bloodlust thing. It's what I worry about is what effects it would have on me after the fact. What kind of psychological counseling, how long would the trauma of killing someone else stay with me? And that still rides with me every day when I carry a gun. I would never want to use a gun in any frivolous manner, yet I would put my life and my gun in front of anybody to protect, the average citizen who's in harm's way from one of these quote-unquote criminals.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to touch base on. An extreme case, we do have people who are homeless and have mental problems.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the subtle case? What if you were in some wars? Where were you in?
I'm
You're a
Vietnam,
vet,
you're a
Vietnam
veteran,
vet.
the Marine Corps.
They evaluate you when you get out. What if there's a certain evaluation level where they say maybe you shouldn't own guns?
Well,
what if they decide, Tom, maybe you should suspend your gun because you shot someone?
if I can get back to, I just want to make one more point about CVH and mental health in general. In the 1970s, there was a big push mainly by the ACLU, to give people with mental disabilities more civil rights. In other words, it wasn't a crime to be mentally ill. You shouldn't be incarcerated. I don't see anybody who could disagree with that. You're right. They should get treatment. They should be mainstreamed in society if possible. On the other hand, a lot of times things like that go too far. All right. It made it very difficult for people with severe mental problems, potentially violent mental problems, to get committed. Right. The process became almost unmanageable.
Yeah.
I personally know a family two families actually, who went through this where they had a person with schizophrenia in the family. He would become violent occasionally, and trying to get him committed for treatment was almost impossible. And this person needed treatment now, not tomorrow or next week, and go through this long, drawn-out series of events you would have to do to protect his civil rights. Protecting his civil rights are very important. Getting him treatment and getting him out of society so he doesn't hurt himself or somebody else is even more
Well,
important.
someone says they want to kill themselves and they're in the hospital.
No, exactly.
that day.
Now you take this Adam Lanza. His mother was trying to get him committed, which, you know, from all reports, supposedly he found out about it, and that's why he killed her and then went crazy. But if she had had the opportunity to get him treatment immediately and get him committed, Newtown might not have ever happened. Okay, so it's not only a gun issue. I think in a broader sense, it's a mental health issue, because I know you've done research, and the people who have been involved in these mass shootings, all of them have been under treatment for some kind of mental health issue at some point.
Yep.
The two kids in Colorado were on Prozac, and they had both been identified. The kid at Virginia Tech, my eldest daughter was there the day that he killed those people, all right? I got a live report from the scene. I was scared to death because she's texting me, telling me what was going on.
The Colorado shooter.
She knew him. She'd actually met him like a week before, and she knew from a 5-minute meeting with him that this guy is over the rainbow somewhere.
Yeah.
All right, now it turns out he's been identified by social workers, by mental health workers, as a danger, not only to himself, but other people. All right? And he's out roaming around the streets, and nobody wants to make the hard decision to get him help, to get him off the street, to get him out of society where he's not going to hurt himself or somebody else.
The Colorado shooter, the university psychologist went to the security or the police, and they said they were concerned. Police ended up saying there wasn't enough. He hadn't done anything. Maybe you can relate to that.
Well, in Connecticut, that's a whole different scenario. We have a statute 17A-503, which says police, if they believe somebody is a threat to themselves or others, can immediately detain that person and take them to a local hospital for evaluation by medical doctors. It's the name for it's a police emergency examination request. So they're taken down to the hospital. Now they're in the care of the doctors, and they can't just walk out against medical advice, where if you allowed somebody who you thought was a danger to themselves or others and took them down and just presented them, they could walk out at any point in time. But once you bring them down on this paper, now the medical staff cannot release him until somebody from the psychiatric staff has had the ability to talk with him and make a determination. Based on that determination, people will be then placed inpatient, and then to keep them longer than that, you go in front of a probate judge, and a probate judge can commit people for extended periods of time. But we in Connecticut do have a law, and it's not just police officers, it's social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, I'm trying to think who else it might extend to, who all have the ability, I mean, their statutes are a little different number, but all have the ability to say, I've identified this person as being a threat risk to either himself or others, and therefore call us to take them down, and we have that in place in Connecticut.
Well, what you've just established is this ginormous gray area, whereas she was trying to have her son, you know, committed and looked after, evaluated, and then on the other hand, you say, I don't know what factors go into that decision.
The factors that go into the decision to me usually is trying to get the individual to articulate they want to hurt themselves or somebody else, as soon as the words are said, that's done, it's over.
Right. But if none of that
Or,
exists,
or if family members, if the mother, say, of a child who's out of control, and I don't mean child, you know, say, a 20-year-old is out of, their child is out of control and says to us, he has made statements of suicidal ideation or statements of hurting other people, based on that information, gives me enough to invoke that law, take him into custody, bring him down to the
the
hospital.
guy in Colorado, it was just a gut feeling that there was something wrong.
Right,
He had been amassing weapons,
right.
and the psychologist felt like there was an issue, but there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't enough for as far as your definition
But,
was to
but
say-
again, where were the parents on this? This is a high school kid who's amassing weapons and under the treatment of a psychologist.
and the Colorado guy was in college,
Right.
so, and he was
Well,
a young man.
if we look here in Middletown, we had a situation that ended up in the, I think he was 18 years old, I don't know. This is back in 1994, I believe, was when I became a police officer, where there was a mother and a son living in a condo, and there was a call of domestic violence, and it just so happens my current wife was the dispatcher who handled the call, who constantly queried the mother, are there any weapons in the house? And the mother kept saying, no, no, no. Come to find out, when the officers responded to it, it was a sergeant and two officers. Something went wrong at some point, and they started wrestling with this individual. And while he was on the ground, he pulled a weapon out of his belt, discharged the weapon, which struck one of the officers in his boot, not actually hitting his foot, but he was shot in the boot. And the officer turned around and shot him and killed him. The mother, come to find out, had purchased several weapons, and not only did this individual have weapons, he had caches of like homemade bombs they found out in the woods and everything else. So here again, there's a thread here that comes together about this parental responsibility
Right.
stuff, and how much you're allowing.
The main thing I'm concerned about is that an overseer of mental health and someone maybe pointing a finger at another could end up being as dangerous as the weapons themselves. What happens if two people say, Tom or Kurt or me, I know they have a gun and they seem a little weird. I think they might be doing something dangerous.
There's a potential for abuse in any law.
Well, I don't know if either of you are aware of it, but now under the Obamacare guidelines, medical providers are already asking questions. People are being asked psychological questions like, do you feel safe? Do you feel threatened? You know, so on and so forth. And they're also being asked, do you have any guns at home? Are the guns loaded? So on and so forth.
Right.
So we've created a whole paradigm shift in the health provider network, where now all of a sudden they become agents of governments to try to do exactly what you're talking about,
Yeah.
saying, well, you know, he said he felt somebody's a threat to him, and he
Feels
has a gun.
even a little depressed, and then all
Yeah,
of a sudden it
yeah.
becomes an
That's
issue.
been going on at the VA hospitals for a couple of years now
Yeah.
already.
But now it's coming mainstream medical health.
You don't see this assault weapon ban going through. I don't see it being able to go through.
I don't see it going through Congress, no. I think it'll be, if it does go, it'll be watered down. And, you know, hopefully it won't go through.
Well, I was talking to some other people. Browning DAR is almost, by the numbers, identical to many of these assault weapons. They're just
Well-
one has wood and the other one has a bunch
Let
of.
me give you a little history on the original assault weapons ban in 1994. Dianne Feinstein, who wrote the original assault weapons ban. You know, I know people in California. I have people in family in California, and why they keep electing this woman who is so far out of touch with reality, it's beyond me. But she is a senator from California. When she wrote the original assault weapons ban in 1994, I actually saw her say this on television on an interview. Somebody asked her, "How did you pick the guns that were in the assault weapons ban?" And she said, "Well, it was very easy. My staff and I got a copy of the Shooter's Bible, which is a book that comes out yearly, and it has every gun that's manufactured in the book and a description of it. And we thumbed through it and we said, that's an ugly one, let's put that on the list. Right? And the gun above it, which you were just saying, give an example of, which did not have a pistol grip, had a wooden stock instead, was exactly the same gun, could do exactly the same thing, take the same magazine as the one below it, that she put on the assault weapons ban. And that's a level of intelligence, or I should say ignorance, that we're dealing with in people like Dianne Feinstein, who are writing these bills, which affect all of our freedoms.
Yeah. So it's the aesthetics.
The
Not
aesthetics
really
don't
the-
mean anything.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I suppose, in conclusion, what would you say is going to be, what's the reality behind this? That, for me, it's bad things are going to happen. It's kind of, something we hear about, but it's never going to stop. The person that seeks to damage other people is going to find the tool, or they're going to make the tool.
I think that, as Tom said, you're always going to have gun crimes. If they outlawed every gun tomorrow, there would still be gun crimes.
I think you guys brought an excellent case.
Thank you.
Excellent points. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's our pleasure.